Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for Star Wars The High Republic The Fallen Star. So this is the main, adult novel for Wave 3 of Phase 1 of the High Republic story. Wave 3 is basically the finale of Phase 1. We now know that Phase 2, I think they confirmed, is mostly or all going to be sort of focused on the backstory of like a lot of things, I suppose establishing a lot of the history, so that when we go, I suppose, into Phase 3, which I'm guessing is going to be continuing on from Phase 1, but now we have the full context of why things are the way they are, and that will allow them to do Phase 3 the most effectively. I'm going to start off here with some brief non-spoiler thoughts, and then jump sort of straight into spoilers. Overall, I like the book, and I think that's just in general. I think the High Republic has been good so far, and there haven't really been a ton of misses or anything like that. I do think this book has a few flaws, and it feels like, in a way, potentially the most flawed of the sort of mainline books. Light of the Jedi, Rising Storm, this. And part of that, I feel, comes down to the sort of expectations that I had for it, and that I expect it to do a bit more because it's ending off Phase 1. But then they never really told us to maybe expect the end of Phase 1 to be its own finale-like thing. But then it is very clearly a step-off point for the start of Phase 2. It's just, from what I've read so far, this one, and then I have read the YA book, Midnight Horizon, neither really feels like it sets up the next phase like all that well. So I'm very interested to see just like when they finally like announce the next kind of wave of books, like how exactly it all kind of comes together. Just because the main criticism I'd probably have from this is that, like, I don't think there's that many like reveals. I don't even think there's too much setup for like immediately what's going to happen next in the present day story. So they do kind of just leave off in a point where, like, okay, one or two of the characters have maybe a clearer arc, but it still mostly feels like this phase probably could continue for another few waves. And is there a need to do like the transition into the flashback stuff right now? And the question I suppose most people probably have is like, are we just stopping present day story for now, and we'll come back to it in like a year and a half when we maybe get to Phase 3? That's the main takeaway from here, because what this book is about, The Fallen Star, you can probably tell, and then right on the back they basically say what's going to happen. It's about basically the slow and steady destruction of Starlight Beacon. Finally, Marchion Ro, the Nihil, target Starlight Beacon, and the book plays out as effectively another disaster. That's been the sort of theme of the three mainline books, is that they're all sort of disaster stories, different types of disaster stories. Light of the Jedi was a more wide-scale one with the emergence stuff. The Attack on the Republic Fair was just, how do you deal with this major event being attacked? Here it's just, what if we slowly and carefully sabotage Starlight Beacon so that it doesn't just straight up explode? We could do that, but we want the world to see, we want the galaxy to see this thing slowly fall apart as everyone on board is helpless to stop it from happening. But everyone sees it slowly fall apart, sees the failure to prevent this, and what a power play that is for Marchion Ro and the Nihil. And you deal with the sort of the characters on board as they try desperately to reverse some of the sabotage, survive, sacrifices need to be made, characters die throughout this book. That's the core of what happens in this, and that seems amazing. And on one hand, you can definitely see what they were going for here, of the loss of Starlight Beacon is absolutely a huge moment in the story, because this is set up as like the greatest of the kind of Republic's great works. This has been the focus, the base of operations for nearly like all of our characters in the story up until now. It is now gone. This is probably one of the biggest moves the Nihil could have made. That is good. The main issue, I think, is as it comes into the end, it doesn't really have all that much of a setup going for it, because surprisingly, one of the highlights of the first two books was how much focus was on the villains, how much Marchion Ro you got, how much they put the time and effort into developing the Nihil and the dynamic of sort of the different Tempest runners, and then Ro and the fight for leadership. That's very pared down in this book. It's only Ro. And because the way they set it up is that he effectively sends in like almost like a suicide squad to do the sabotage, and he just watches the sabotage play out on his ship from a distance away in the system. Every bit with Marchion Ro is kind of just him laughing at what he's just accomplished, and it gives you a cool one aspect of his character, but it feels like the book is missing so much more of the kind of political, in a way, intrigue of the Nihil. There's no insight into a lot of the very interesting kind of backstory history, which I guess the Phase 2 is going to explain a lot of that stuff with the hyperspace prospecting, the origins of like what the species is, the situation like with his father, and just set the stage for like what's going on with his family's like connection to like the Leveler that they teased in the previous book. None of that really is addressed in this book, and I think that's maybe where some of my criticism would come in, of just like there's no reveals about that stuff. The Leveler is still mostly kept, but borderline this book tells you less about the Leveler than they did in the previous book when it was still mysterious. It's just, oh yeah, you make the connection that this is the same thing as that. Yeah, it's happening again, but there's still even less like being open about it at all. And just I wanted a bit more, and even as the book comes to an end, it feels like, okay, you've done this, what's next? Because of some of the stuff I'll get into in the spoilers, like it just kind of feels like the book ends and it's like, do you have a next stage of the plan? I'm not really sure, and that was a negative, because that was such a highlight of the previous two books, that it not being here was really, really felt. It has the same basic format as a lot of the other High Republic books, which is that it has a relatively sort of slow start. Like there's that first like third of the book, as before the disaster probably happens, you know, you're dealing with a few other things, and then it finally happens and it really kicks into gear. I think the problem here is that the story, this should be sort of the biggest storytelling they're doing so far in the High Republic, but they seem set on telling this more contained story, because it's the disaster of sort of being trapped in a station that you know is going to crash, and what the characters are doing there. And it just feels like the location that they're in is not as interesting as a lot of the different things where we went during the Emergence, or it's not as unique as just the dynamic you had on Valo during the attack on the Fair, because they don't use a lot of the uniqueness of Starlight Beacon all that much, because it's just characters running around corridors talking about like, oh, we lost the top section, we need to get to the medical section, and then you have stuff with like Leox and the crew of the vessel, as they're mainly dealing with the other pilots in like the hangar bay. And they're the main sort of locations. It just feels like it is just a lot of running through corridors with the chaotic nature of everything that's happening. And there is a lot of characters at play in this book. I really appreciate how it's able to sort of incorporate like a lot of the main characters who've been in the main novels up to now, but also incorporate some characters from like the comics, from the YA books in here, in that you have some interesting blends of characters where you have Chansey and Nan. They're in this book. But then you also have, you know, the crew of the vessel in here as well. So a lot of the YA stuff is kind of like brought in here to be the sort of side plot. And that all works well and highlights the strength of the storytelling that they've done across all the different books. That you can have like the side characters from this other book be the side characters of this book, and there's a slight dynamic with the characters from this one, and stuff like that. Like Senator Staros is in here, and that's kind of cool. But the main thing I just say is that, like, while there's some very eventful things that do happen, and if you just sort of list the main events of this book, it's kind of like, okay, that's cool, that seems really good. A lot of it, once it got going, just felt like it didn't really give enough time to set up a lot of the character moments. Because there are a few character deaths here, some of them ended up feeling just a little unsatisfying, not because like the scenes where the character died was like badly done, but just that the arc that you wanted them to go on before their death just didn't get the chance to shine because of that sort of chaos of just the disaster going on at the time. You don't, because you have to just have every character reacting to everything, the two characters who are like key to each other's arc can't just stand and have a conversation because they have to be going past each other in the corridors type thing. And it's all okay, it just about does enough, but it never quite, I think, executes on these arcs well enough, and especially because there's some significant character deaths. I just wished a little bit more could have been done. But overall, it's good, and I think a lot will depend on how they go about like announcing the next wave of books, and if the continuation maybe isn't as far off as we maybe think. But it is going to be frustrating if we have to wait a year and a half to find out what Marchion Ro is planning to do next. What what the plot that Bell is set on at the end of the book, what he's going to do, what happens to Elzar next. Those questions that you have, it's going to be rough if we have to wait that long for it, and it's not just the next book. They really have to justify a lot of that flashback, even though I want to see the flashback. So we'll go into spoilers now, because we have to talk about some of the details here. So straight away, I think we have to get into the sort of character deaths, because that's probably the biggest thing that they do here. Yes, characters have died in the previous books, but this book is the one that really felt like, okay, this is sort of a finale of one of the waves of High Republic, so let's actually do some stuff here. So the most significant character who dies is Stellan Gios. So main character from the previous book, effectively one of the main characters in this book, one of our kind of big three Jedi Master characters is killed. He dies basically as the bottom half of Starlight Beacon enters the atmosphere of the planet it's about to crash into. He stays at the controls to use the sort of absolute last ditch of the thrusters that they have to slightly guide the crash site away from like basically a populated city and more out into sort of an open area and limit the damage. So because he's sort of the acting warden of Starlight Beacon, he takes that role upon himself to do this. Now, the build-up over the course of the book to his death is effectively that one of the big plot points is that part of the sabotage is that the leveler is sort of delivered its cargo on Starlight Beacon. So it takes him a while to figure it out, but the leveler is slowly picking off people and really affecting the Jedi's ability to use the Force. So they can't be as effective as they usually were. It's causing chaos, it's taking down Jedi, and causes all of the Jedi to be very, very cautious. Stellan is nearly taken out by the leveler. Just being near it basically causes the sort of husk state to happen, like what happened to Loden and so on. And he's really taken out by this. And you can tell that the war with the Nihil has been taking it out of him, because he is the sort of poster child of the Jedi because of what happened in the previous book. That image of him protecting the Chancellor. So much pressure has been placed on himself by everyone, but also by himself. And the main dynamic that they go for is Orla Jareni is in this book, and they sort of establish that like they met before. She's the one who's helping Elzar through his issues. But Stellan has an issue with Orla, even though he sort of respects her strength and ultimately does deep down respect her. He doesn't like that she's a way seeker, wayfinder, whatever it is, because he is the Jedi who is. We do things by the rules in the way that the Jedi do them. So they oppose each other because of that. And the main dynamic they go for is that Orla kind of, you know, says some relatively cutting things, kind of winning arguments basically against Stellan on the basis of, you've always just sort of been the poster boy of the Order, and because of that, you can't disobey the rules effectively. You can't ever, like, in a way, like, truly be free. Have you ever kind of done stuff just for yourself? Made decisions that is Stellan Gios making the decision, not Jedi poster boy Stellan Gios making the decision because he has to remain in that position. And I think it's a nice idea of an arc, but it's one of those things where, like, I think over the course of the book, they never quite have enough scenes or time enough to just sit on this arc and have it play out in the way you want it to. Ultimately, what they do is that he makes the decision, like, he doesn't have to go to the controls and steer the ship away and make the sacrifices everyone else is escaping. He doesn't have to do that. But he makes the decision that, no, this is what I'm going to do. I'm in charge. I am the leader of Starlight Beacon. I'm not just going to, it should be my responsibility. So he stays and does this, and that's his major sacrifice here. He saves a lot of people on the ground. He did a lot of decent, leadership over the course of the book, even though he was taken out at different points by nearly being affected by the Leveler. He ultimately fulfilled his role as a leader and went out in a sort of big way. But the idea that they roughly get across is that, like, he did this one on his own terms, and it was Stellan Gios who made this decision, not, what would be expected of Stellan Gios in a way making this decision. What adds a lot more to Stellan's death is sort of why he's almost forced into this situation, is that this is where the arc of it's basically Elzar's arc plus the sort of Chancey Yarrow and Nan involvement in the book. So Nan and Chancey were established from the previous books to sort of be working together now for, like, the Graf family that was set up before. They basically just randomly happened to get, like, arrested, effectively going through a checkpoint, because they're recognized, because obviously, like, they've been in other books, so they've been reported previous sort of Nihil sympathizers. Now, the whole time they're trying to get across, we're not Nihil anymore, but because they're, like, suspicious characters, who's really going to believe them? So they're in or around the place as this is going on. They do get sort of, freed, and this is where they begin to interact with the sort of, suicide, the sabotage squad sent by Marchion Ro, who are basically like Nihil cultists. They are fine with sort of just dying to accomplish this because it's for Lord Ro. And Nan and Chancey are both like, ooh, well, I can sort of get supporting the Nihil, but, like, I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't, like, sacrifice myself for them in that way. They inadvertently, they like, purposefully, they maybe don't realize the full extent of it. They end up helping out this squad to basically plant the bombs that cause a lot of the stuff that's going to lead to Starlight Beacon crashing. So that's the first thing that they do. They then later have a turnaround and realize that, okay, we maybe shouldn't have done that. We'll see how this goes, and, like, they try to get off with, like, different plans with different characters, but ultimately they end up in this situation where, like, we're not going down with this ship, we're getting out of here. Okay, we need to fix the ship. And obviously Chancey is an engineer, so she's one of the few sort of specialists that's actually on board at this point, who could actually use her skills to fix something that is otherwise deemed irreparable. So she ends up in a position where she's down effectively, I think it's at, like, the thruster controls, and they've been out of action, they haven't been able to do this, they can't maneuver the bottom half of Starlight Beacon out of a crash course with the planet. But if they got the thrusters on board, they'd be like just about able to sort of prevent a full-on crash of this bottom half of the station. So this is sort of them roughly redeeming themselves. As this happens, basically, as Chansey's tinkering with these controls, Elzar finds his way to the same area. And because he knows that they are prisoners, and they're now out, and they're tinkering with the controls, and he knows that they're Nihil sympathizers, he immediately, like, split second is like, they are further trying to sabotage this. I know that they are Nihil sympathizers, and he just straight away moves, lightsaber activates, and he just cuts Chansey Yarrow in half. They literally describe it like that. He cuts her in half, kills her on the spot. And they set this up then of like, what have you done? You have killed our only hope for survival, basically. She was trying to help you. You've killed us all. Like, Nan literally says that to Elzar. And like, they do set up that he has a little bit of a sort of angry, potentially leaning towards dark side moment. Otherwise, Elzar has been, because Orla's been helping him through his issues, he's for the most part been actually able to deal with it relatively well over the course of this book, and he's gradually beginning to reconnect with the Force. But in this moment, it all comes together of just like the people we've lost already. Why are you here? I can't believe this. Why are the Nihil so heartless? And he just acts on instinct and kills. And it's one of those situations where, like, I get what they're doing. They have to hit it home to present to Elzar, your actions have doomed us all. But they're not like, this is not like Anakin kills like children type situation of like dark side. Yes, he cuts someone down in cold blood, but it is ultimately a villainous character he has killed here. He maybe should have asked questions first, but they're in the middle of a chaotic situation, and he sees someone at the controls of potentially the one thing that they could do to fix this situation, and he reacts on instinct. Now, I don't want to defend him too much, because the ultimate character arc that they go on is that what happens is that because of this means that the station is guaranteed to crash now. They don't have anyone with the skill set to repair the thrusters, and it's Elzar's fault. So by the end, when he finds out that Stellan stayed behind to, direct it away with what little they had to basically just find a better crash site, Elzar realizes Stellan died because of his actions. And look, you can look at that in a slightly different way, but to him, that is effectively what happened here. His actions, killing Chansey Yarrow, the one person who could have saved them, resulted in Stellan having to do what he had to do. But I really like what they do with Elzar, and I think Elzar is probably the best written sort of character arc within this book, because it feels like they actually do something with him. Like I said with Stellan, they try to get across this idea of like, him making decisions on his own, but it never, I think, fully comes together. Even though I really like overall the character and I like the sacrifice, that arc I don't think quite worked. This arc, though, of like, he's this character who is sort of falling to his kind of temptations a little bit, leaning a little bit into the direction of the Jedi and towards things that the Jedi aren't typically expected to do. But he purposefully is aware of that and wants to get past it. That's why he's working on it with Orla, and he's made progress. And then he has this slip up, which in any other situation apart from this wouldn't be as like crazy as it actually is, but it ends up resulting in effectively the character he considers, the pole star of the three sort of stars that Elzar, Avar, and Stellan are. He views their trio as these two are ultimately himself and Avar are guided by Stellan. Stellan is like the rock, and without that, he sort of questions like, what will he be able to do? But because Stellan effectively died because of his actions, he now has sort of, instead of falling further to these temptations and realizing, I'm gone, I have to leave, he's kind of like, no, because of this sacrifice, I cannot allow myself to fall even further. And he's going to use this slip up and what the result of it was as this is what can happen if I do that. So I really have to be careful about this. And that's what I like about this, is that they're playing with the idea that it's still possible in this era for a Jedi to fall to the dark side. But they're not overly leaning in that direction as much as they are. Like a lot of the prequel stuff, it sort of makes sense in a way why anytime you see a Jedi go a little bit dark, you feel they're falling to the dark side. Here, that doesn't feel like it's an option. The first character in the High Republic to fall to the dark side is going to be a massive thing. I like that they're just presenting the idea of like, no, this is a character who is just struggling with a few of the aspects of being a Jedi, and they're actually trying to work through it. And they're making mistakes along the way, but they're still trying. They're trying to do sort of like the Anakin Skywalker thing of, if they caught the warning signs like early on and actually tried to deal with them at an earlier point. That's kind of the impression I get for Elzar. So it means that by the end of this book, like, he has this really interesting thing going on with him where he effectively, with Stellan gone, it means that him and Avar now have to assume even bigger positions. Avar and Stellan argued a lot in this book about the sort of correct direction to do things, because Stellan viewed Avar leaving to fight the Nihil as her abandoning her post as being the kind of warden of the beacon. He had to assume that role. And they present the idea that, they were both kind of right. The leveler was affecting their like emotions and how they were talking to each other. So like Avar is probably going to maybe reassume her role and want to do that in the right way, but she's probably going to need some backup. And so is Elzar actually going to stick around in the position to try and redeem himself? Because he does sort of assume a little bit of a leadership role towards the end of the book, and especially when Stellan is taken out of action because of the effects of the leveler. And he does a reasonable job, and you can see the potential for him, if he deals with his issues, to be one of the great Jedi, because we already know, in terms of his connection to the Force, his power, he is one of the best. And so I'm so eager to see where they go with him. He's definitely, I think, he probably has the most interesting arc out of almost any character in the High Republic. I'd say him and Marchion Ro as a villain, they are probably like your two absolute made most interesting characters. While I'm still dealing with that trio of like Chansey, Nan, Elzar, and the connection to Stellan, Chansey obviously dies. Her arc beyond that, they mention the whole, the gravity thing, so that's still in play with the Graft family. We'll see where it comes back into play, but obviously she is dead. She does mention a few times that, like, she's pretty conniving. Like, that was the main takeaway from her book, was that she decided not to try and, like, she was actually, like, annoyed at her daughter making the decision to not go with her. But she has her little regrets that show that she still cares, and she wishes she could make things up with her daughter. But she dies before she's able to do that. So it's going to be interesting, like, when the daughter finds out about that. Nan, they'd sort of placed the idea of, like, oh, Nan is now sort of, the new effective, daughter in a way of Chansey, and she's trying to guide her to be more free. But effectively, once Chansey dies, Nan realizes and sort of takes the approach of like, well, I guess I'll just go back to what I was doing before, of like, I still look up to Marchion Ro, so I'll go back to him and sort of beg for forgiveness. I've proven to be useful to him before, surely I can make that happen again. But she doesn't realize that Ro has sort of changed a little bit and is now very suspicious of his allies of the Nihil. He's taken to, there's only basically droids crewing the Gaze Electric, apart from, like, he has one assistant, and Senator Staros is his sort of lover slash, insight into the Republic Senate. And, like, beyond that, like, they're the only like three like living beings aboard the Gaze Electric now, because he is so fearful in a way of infighting and effectively what he had to deal with over the course of the first two books in a way, especially the first book. He doesn't want Tempest Runners getting in the way of things anymore. So Nan returning, how is he going to handle that? Is he going to view her as maybe being a threat, given that she effectively did turn on him to a degree? So will that work or not? The other thing with Nan is that she basically ends up taking the ship of effectively Leox's rival. I'll get into the whole Leox thing, I suppose, next. But they just established that this ship is sort of notable. It's maybe sort of a vessel equivalent, so at least it's a named ship. She seems to like it. It's called the Ace of Staves, is it? I think it is. So she seems to like this ship. She has her own ship. That's fine. I am interested in where they go with Nan, because she is a younger character, but a younger character who is more on the villainous side of things. And like, she mentions like Wreath, and there's still that setup of like she kind of does like him, even though she was mainly just sort of playing with him. So there's a few setups like that of like her meeting up with other characters and stuff like that. She seems to have a bit of a rivalry with Affy on the vessel and want to like kill her effectively or fight her at some point. In that as she's escaping with her new ship, she's just like, oh, there's the vessel over there. I could fire on it, but that would probably cause an incident. I'll just go into hiding for now and try and find Marchion Ro. Which is like, okay, fine. That's at least something for her character. The crew of the vessel, so Leox, Geode, and Affy, they bring Orla and Elzar from the sort of training they were doing to the Starlight Beacon. So the crew's main involvement in this book is effectively interacting with the other pilots who have ships that want to leave the Starlight Beacon. The sabotage is not just that like the ship explodes and it's been damaged, the beacon explodes and has been damaged enough that it's slowly falling. They established that there's like multiple layers of things that they've done to sort of prevent the sort of preventative measures from stopping it being as damaging as it could be. So they sort of established that like there's this interesting kind of communications thing that they've set up where like it gives the impression that the beacon is now blocking communications of all ships outwards. Leox ends up figuring out that it was just this sort of like kind of trick where it gives the impression of that because it did it like initially, but then it doesn't afterwards, and that they actually could communicate the whole time, but it just delays the whole process. By the time they finally contact other ships to come and help, they can't. And that's what makes it such a spectacle, is that there's the beacon is crashing for so long and gradually falling into the gravity of the planet that so many ships come to help and arrive in system, but they're just there, not able to do anything because effectively they can't open any of the kind of docking ports or anything like that, open the hangar to get them inside. And even if they do get inside, what are they doing? There's no capacity to tow such as a space station, so there's just ships there to watch, effectively. Otherwise, the only ship watching is the Gaze Electric, silently in the background, watching this all just happen. So Leox gets a few chances to shine because of his sort of unique perspective on things, but we also get, I suppose, a slightly different angle on his character of like, they effectively introduce the one character who can make the most chill character in the galaxy angry. So his sort of, shipping kind of pilot rival is introduced, who is the initial owner of the Ace of Staves. And he's just this absolutely frustrating character who basically just tries to scam everyone he meets. And this is why Leox hates him. They established that there's a bit of a history where he tried to run a scam on the Bind Guild, and Leox just did things the normal way, which ended up outing this guy, and that's why this guy hates Leox. And Leox hates his behavior so much that the usually relaxed and calm Leox actually hates this guy. And there's a few lines of dialogue from him that kind of get across that, like, yeah, this guy kind of in a way like almost like wouldn't hurt anyone, but he wouldn't mind it if this guy was killed. That was a fun dynamic with him. Um, Otherwise, like there's some cool moments where he gets a chance to shine, being quite clever. There's a moment where you think he's killed because he's doing stuff on the outside of the ship with some sort of magnet clamps, and he gets like blown off. But then they reveal like he actually had just like a sort of old school sort of like kind of, was it like parachute type thing, and he kind of manages to kind of get back in. So yeah. This is as they're in the atmosphere. So he gets blown off the ship as it's falling. So he is falling to the planet, and they think he's just dead. But then it's revealed he actually has an old-fashioned parachute, because the whole book they establish he does things in the old way, in that he's using like I think a sextant to find their position in the galaxy, because all the a lot of the equipment has been damaged by the Nihil attack. Like, it's fun. I don't think it's a huge involvement in the book as such, but he does some nice organization stuff, and he acts as sort of like a leader of the pilots. And because he respects the Jedi, there's also that dynamic going on, as the other guy tries to almost like organize a coup of like the Jedi are trying to keep us from escaping the station when they're not really, but he ends up helping them in the end. Geode gets a few cool moments. This is probably Geode's best showing, in that they're a little bit more open about the idea that, like, yeah, Geode just plain does move. No one ever really sees him move, in that they look away and he's like moved position. They still play on those ideas of like, you never just see him in motion. And they do still play on the idea that like this character who's effectively just a rock is like a playboy, and actually has this amazing charisma with people, and is an amazing navigator. And they reveal a few more things about the species, in that one, he's incredibly durable, in that in the hangar the walls are like magnetized. The evil shipping pilot guy fires a shot off, and it starts ricocheting around, and until it hits something that it doesn't bounce off, someone's going to get killed. Geode steps in the way of the blast and just takes it, because he's a rock, so it doesn't do much damage to him. Affy at that time explains that, oh hey, his species can actually magnetize themselves if they want, because he's a rock. I guess there's some sort of thing where they can give themselves magnetic properties. So later on in the book, how this character ends up getting killed is that he basically takes a hostage to try and force the situation. Geode sort of gets in the way. He tries to shoot Geode down, but Geode magnetizes himself, and it just reflects and kills him. So cool moments from him. Affy doesn't get like I think too much to do. Again, they play up a little bit of a kind of rivalry between her and Nan. They have a little bit of a scuffle, which just creates more of a tension with Nan later, that she wants to take revenge at some point. But that's really about it for her. In terms of the other kind of key characters and what happens here, Bell, of course, is a focus in this book. Also Burryaga as sort of the Padawans, so their masters, Indira Stokes and Nibasik, are also here. As I said, Orla Jareni is here. So this again, I suppose, brings up a lot of the deaths here. So they introduced this new Jedi character who is mainly involved with younglings, but is sort of getting back out into the action for the first time. He is like the first Jedi to be killed by the Leveler. He gets husked, as they call it, and they find him, and it's pretty tragic. He's a very sort of, funny kind of Jedi. He's got a good sense of humor, so they immediately create the tone switch of like, he's such a fun character, but he's killed in such a horrific way. Then, how exactly does this work again? Orla Jareni goes out to investigate it. The situation here is that there are 2 shipments of Rathtars on board. They begin to realize that's crazy. 1 shipment is wild enough, 2 is just crazy. This must be where they're holding the thing that is causing the force sort of dampening effect. So she goes out to investigate. And what's so interesting is that the whole start of the book really does set it up that like she is going to be a key important character because she's helping out Elzar. They've now just kind of introduced this dynamic that she had previously with Stellan and had the scene between the two of them. She's going out to investigate. Great. She seems like one of the most veteran Jedis here. She's going to accomplish something here. And then they just cut to this, scene from her perspective where she just falls to the leveler and you see it happen from her perspective. Like, she just falls into despair, fear. There's a little bit of the whole, like, hunger thing. And the chapter ends with, and Orla, like, fell to the ground for, like, the last time. And then Bel ends up finding her later and it's confirmed that she's dead. She is husked. That's probably the most shocking death in the entire book because the other guy is like, okay, yeah, he was introduced to die. Orla though, no, that was really, really shocking because it felt like they'd set up some big stuff for her, and especially because they'd done stuff in the previous books like, oh look, she has her own ship, she's a wayfinder, she's doing her own thing, and she's committed to it. Cool, but no, she's gone. And Nibasik, so Buryaga's master, goes out. She also gets taken out by the leveler. Bel's master, Indira Stokes, is sort of caught. I think they get across the idea that like she's kind of like behind. Nibasik gets fully captured by the leveler's power. Indira mostly does, but then I think the leveler gets like kind of chased off last minute. So Indira's in like a coma for most of the book, but survives. And the idea is that she'll slowly but surely potentially get back to normal. But it creates an interesting situation for Bel. And the arc of Bel in this book is that he's dealing with the devastating loss of Loden, doing everything that they did to get him back, only for him to be turned to stone and crumble to dust right in front of Bel. The hope immediately taken away. Drastic effect on Bel, who is not doing super well. He's in a sort of kind of depressed state. He's still capable and doing his own thing, but you can tell there's like an anger. He kind of wants revenge. He wants to be in action against the Nihil to stop this. This is where a lot of the dynamic with Buryaga really helps him to just kind of calm down about these type of things and realize that it's not all so bad. But then you get that sequence in the book where like he finds Orla, then later he finds Nibasik, so he finds Buryaga's master dead. Buryaga comes over, and then the roles sort of have to be reversed as he has to help Buryaga through the same feelings he felt with the loss of his master, and that's really tragic. But then Bel has to deal with the fact that his new master now is effectively in a similar position. So he deals with a loss, and that ultimately is his arc in a way of how does Bel deal with loss after loss after loss. It feels like there's so much unluckiness happening to him, such poor luck that all the people that he seems to care about, something happens to them. Because on top of that, one of the big action scenes is that yes, the leveler was one of the Rathtar deliveries cargoes, but one of the other ones was actually just Rathtar. So there is a fight scene with a bunch of Rathtar. Like Elzar's involved, Buryaga's involved, and so on. And Buryaga gets sort of swarmed by the Rathtars. And what actually happens, if I remember correctly, it's like they effectively get sucked out into space kind of through an airlock. So the idea is that if he finds some way to breathe out in space, he still has a bunch of Rathtar in or around him that are going to like rip him apart. He is all but dead, but the book, at every point possible when it's brought up, makes the point of like, oh, no body. And especially right at the end, Bel is like, no, he's still my friend. We don't know for sure that he's dead. And he comes up with a few ideas in his head of like, well, if I can come up with these ideas, he could have come up with these ideas because he was so capable. And he's a Wookiee, so he's really durable and stuff like that. And it feels like he's dealt with so much loss up to now. Obviously, he finds out his master is going to make it, but she is in a coma still. And it will be a while before she, I suppose, is anywhere near back in action. So he's kind of on his own at the moment, and they end the book with Bell with just he is going to search for Buryaga, and I actually really like that as an arc for him, and I really want to see that book where like that is the quest for him. We get like a Bell Zettifar character focus trying to find Buryaga. That seems like a really cool idea in terms of how they reveal how Buryaga got out of it, because I don't think there's any way they reveal Bell goes on a mission and just finds out Buryaga's dead. That would be pretty crazy unless that mission brings him into contact with some other crazy plot. Either way, Bell has more or less been the main Padawan character of these books, so his story is quite significant. Beyond that, he proves himself really really resourceful in the middle of this action. He does a lot of work in terms of like being directed around by like Stellan and Elzar and so on. Like I think he helps the medical platform. They managed to, that's the one part of Starlight Beacon that they managed to save, is they sort of separate the medical platform separately than everything else, and because it's like a smaller section, it's not going to get captured, and I think they managed to get ships on board that and get people off. So Bell is sort of key to saving those people, some of the few people who survive. They do get across that basically everyone on the top section of Starlight, apart from a few people who escaped, died. So there's a lot of sort of the more minor Jedi characters who do die on the top half of the station, which crashes somewhere in the middle of the book, because it's the bottom half of the station that is the big crash scene at the end that Stellan dies during. So there's that. So that's most of the deaths. It's just like, okay, Orla, Nib, Indira is nearly killed. The funny Jedi guy from the start, I forget his name. Chansey dies, like I said, and so on. So that's a lot of that stuff. I completely lost my train of thought there for a second, but they definitely, I think, do some reasonable jobs with the character arcs. It's just that it's still a little vague. Like for the finale of your first kind of third of the story overall, it's a little weird to leave it off with just like you're still waiting for like almost anything to happen. The Marchion Rose stuff is, I feel like I've already explained most of it, but like it literally is just him sitting on the Gaze Electric watching this happen. They reveal that he has this relationship with Senator Staros. It's one of those weird things where like he seems to like enjoy the relationship to a certain degree, but ultimately finds her like a little bit over the top. The most interesting part that I found of this section was this new assistant character that they introduce here. I don't remember her being in any of the other books, but she seems very loyal to Marchion, really capable. Just she seems to know straight away exactly what he would want to do and the way he would want to do it. But she's not doing it in a way where it's coming across like she's sort of serving him in this way to try and get something from him. It just seems like she is just fully loyal to him and is extremely competent, and he seems to really respect her for that. It doesn't seem like there's like maybe too much of a romantic interest for that. I think when you get some of her perspective, she ultimately does reveal that she like really respects him. But it's just like the whole time they're setting this up is that like it's actually Staros who is sort of jealous of her and like almost wishes that the assistant will be more jealous of her and wants a rivalry, but she just is very competent, just doing her job. And so I'm wondering what the deal is with her and why she is the one sort of living character, like actual like non-droid character who is a sort of Nihil member who's on board the ship. Where does she come from? What's the deal with her? Because it's a relatively simple character. I can see a lot of people just coming through this book and just being like, hey, there was an assistant character. But for some reason, she really stood out to me reading this book. And I think there's going to be some cool stuff with with her as we go forward, and maybe her having deeper ambitions and maybe some big twists going on there. By the end of the book, the main thing that happens with Marchion Ro is just that you find out that he he has become completely just suspicious of the Nihil. He doesn't want any of them really around him, just in case they try to backstab him. Right at the end, after the Starlight Beacon has crashed, he basically sends out a message, effectively like to the Jedi, to the Republic, and reveals himself to be the Eye of the Nihil. So to all of them, this is the first time they're hearing about this, because they still think Lorna Dee is the Eye of the Nihil. But no, it's him. And it obviously makes them question, like, we've been fighting them this whole time and we never knew about their actual leader. And he basically just talks about how we orchestrated this and this and this, we did all this, look at what we've just done, the galaxy is now mine. And it's cool, like he finally reveals himself, cool speech, that's sort of significant. They now know who they're up against. He's confident enough to reveal himself. The problem is just that it feels like Ro is in probably his weakest position he's been in this whole time. Yes, he took down Starlight Beacon, but that crew is gone now. The Leveler, I guess, crashed with the ship and is dead. He is on the outs, I suppose, with most of the Nihil forces, even though I suppose that's more of a personal thing and you can still command them to go wherever. But otherwise, the Nihil have been losing this war. And the whole setup for like how this is even possible and how there's no support that arrives to help the Beacon early on is that there's this sort of last-ditch attempt of like desperate Nihil attacks on core worlds, which is covered more in the Midnight Horizon book, are just to distract the Jedi, to send them away so that there's not as many Jedi on Starlight Beacon. So even though like they've lost the Beacon, what has actually what has he accomplished here? I think they're going to play more into the political situation of like he is targeting all the good things of the Republic, and so them trying to fix things is just going to create more targets across the galaxy, in that if we build a station here, no planet's going to want that station near them because it could cause a disaster. And so it's kind of creating like almost this curse around the Republic of like, we're watching you. We can strike anything that you make, so don't make anything. And that's an interesting situation to sort of create. Otherwise, on the Marchion Ro side of things, it probably feels like, yes, now is probably actually the time to explain a lot of the backstory stuff and then go into what the next stage of his plan is. I think for a lot of the Jedi characters, it feels like their stories have now just been abruptly halted when they don't necessarily need to be. So that's what's so interesting about this book. It's just it's in a way like the first time we're seeing this, like this major publishing project where they have it planned out like this, and sort of they didn't even know, I suppose, in a way, what expectations to set for the finale of just one of the phases. And I just maybe expected a little bit more in terms of reveals, and by that I basically mean like it's stuff like the Leveler. Why didn't we learn anything new about the Leveler? Why was it kept in almost even more secrecy in this book? Why was this the book where Marchion Ro, basically the least amount of sort of significant things happen with him and the Nihil? They're the sort of things that just kind of linger in my mind coming after this. And even bringing a little bit of Midnight Horizon into play here. Even the way it does sort of its ending is kind of like, okay, like this doesn't really feel like much of a finale. Like there's no resolution as such to all that much in this. So I think that's why they never really positioned it as like the third of 3 novels or anything like that. The wave thing is more of a thing that the fans are talking about, and it's just a technical thing for when they release the books, more so than it directly means that it's going to be a big monumental thing. And I guess it's more the finale of Phase 3, the last book in Phase 3, last wave of Phase 3. That's going to be the big thing. But we'll see what they do. I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about with this book. As much as I think there is more to criticize, I still think it is a very good book. in that the dynamic of the ship slowly falling, and it being just, we can't stop this, but then there's hope at the end, but then the Elzar arc comes in and Stellan's forced to sacrifice himself. That is actually like really good and strong, and a lot of that does come together, I think, quite nicely. It's just maybe a little bit sort of meandering in the middle, that like there's maybe a little bit at the start that some of that page count maybe should have been given more towards developing some of the arcs in the middle, like just giving a little bit more to Stellan to hit home what the dynamic was right at the end. But so far, it has been 3 good mainline books out of 3 for the High Republic. So my next High Republic review is going to be Midnight Horizon. I've read it once. I definitely feel with that book I do need to read it again in full. So I'll tentatively schedule that for maybe at some point next week. And then I haven't yet read, was it Mission to Disaster, I think it is, the middle grade book from this wave. I'll get on that as well, and that review will be after that once again. And that will wrap up, I suppose, all the novels from Phase 1 of the High Republic. But they're my thoughts on The Fallen Star. If you've read the book or just watched this video, what are your thoughts on this third of the main novels for the High Republic? Did you like it? Did you agree, disagree with what I said about it? But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.